bien. Tengo que hablar que no hablo muy bien español, pero entonces voy a cometer la falta de educación de hablar en inglés en Argentina, siendo un brasileño. First of all, this is an honor for me being here. And I'd like to thank you, Luis, and all the organizing committee of this very impressive event, impressive Congress in plant physiology, and the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology and the Argentinian Society of Plant Physiology have an agreement, and I think this is very helpful for the science in South America. So I don't know if it's good or bad to be the last speaker in Congress, if it is because we've seen so much during this week, and now I have the last one, so then you see what you thought. So this is the title of my speech that I was asked to talk here: Plant Physiology in South America, Diagnostics and Perspectives. So I'm going to mix some subjects here and give my message. So this is just to link with the title of my speech. So the science in South America has been performed, and as you can see here, there's a lot of papers published in Brazil. And the effort made in Argentina and Chile and all other countries in South America is also great. But I would like to rescue some paper that was published in 1998. I am a classic ecophysiologist, and it was conducted by Dr. Eduardo Ziegler, that is one of the authors of the famous book, Plant Physiology. And in this paper, they conduct some experiments showing the importance of some traits, ecophysiology traits, in wheat and cotton. So basically, they show that stomatoconductance of a genotype of wheat and a genotype of cotton really well correlates with the yield, the grain yield and lint yield in cotton. So very strong and positive correlation that we can see there, right? Stomatoconductance. And they also saw that the very intuitive trait that is always looked for to be related with yield, which is the net photosynthesis. In this case, it was not significant. So the net photosynthesis could not be significant with, did not correlate with yield, not even in cotton and neither in wheat. But on the other hand, there was a great correlation between yield, productivity, and stomatoconductance. So, and that was the main focus of this paper, right? So, and they were also able to demonstrate that the stomatoconductance of the third generation could correlate very well with the stomatoconductance of the fourth generation. In this case, in wheat, right? So this shows that in this case, stomatoconductance was have a great heritability, right? So, and the explanation for stomatoconductance being very well correlated with yield here was that high stomatoconductance could lead to low leaf temperature, and that would help photosynthesis to be maintained in a good level during all the day, mainly in the afternoon, where temperatures get high, right? So, and they would suggest at that time, 1998, that they should work, or the scientific community should work with molecular markers for stomatoconductance and yield, so that genes could be put in the crops to solve problems in the field related to temperature and leaf and live photosynthesis, right? Another example, I just brought here some examples. This is in rice. 3 upland ripe genotypes of rice here. This is from a manuscript we're submitting. This is not photosynthesis here. This is a traditional upland rice genotype. This is an intermediate one. And Maravilla is a modern cultivar. So there were no differences between these cultivars here throughout their cycle. On the other hand, the Primavera was the highest yielding genotype, right? And since there was no explanation with net photosynthesis, it was found a good explanation with harvest index, which is above 0.5, and in rice above 0.5 harvest index are very competitive number, right? And also the seed strength could also explain the highest yield obtained in this case. There are some problems with the units here, I'm sorry, but you can also see here that stomatoconductors was not different between cultivars as well, right? And that the same applies also. Yeah, so stomatoconductors, and I thought transpiration was here too. And the same applies to transpiration. And here, what explains the higher harvest index and highest yield of Primavera was the dry matter accumulation rate between panicle initiation and flowering. As you can see there, there's a much more, the rate of this dry matter accumulation is higher between this phenophase as compared to the other 2 genotypes. And in the next phenophase, it also can be observed between flowering and maturation. So Primavera, which is the highest yielding genotype here, it had a higher dry matter accumulation rate. So another thing that we did here was to project the highest crop growth rate and project that into the leaf area. So as you can see here, when you project Primavera, thank you. And as you can see here, so when you project the highest crop growth rate of Primavera, which was the highest yielding genotype here, into the leaf area index profile, you can see that there was no emission of leaves as compared to the others. When you see, for example, the traditional form here, so after this highest crop growth rate, there's a lot of leaf emission and here as well. So this could explain the highest yield here, right? So although with no differences between genotypes with dry matter, total dry matter accumulation throughout their cycles, we could depict some traits, ecophysiological traits and classical traits in plant physiology here to explain yields. As I've been seeing during this week, with very well good performed works here. So what explains here what explains here the highest yields here is related with the harvest index and the strength and the sink strength, right? So in this case, dry matter accumulation is more important or are critical, and the sink strength is more important than net photosynthesis, right? So this is just an example. Another example that I bring here is in citrus, and a recent paper that I published with this guy here, is the vice president of the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology. There is a concept very known that the photosynthesis in trees, or specifically in citrus, they are higher, absolute values are higher during the summer as compared to the winter. This is very known, right? But we were able to demonstrate that when we made some calculations to see the variation in leaf carbohydrates concentrations during the night in the summer. The leaf was exporting the carbohydrates produced by the photosynthesis here. And that was confirmed when we calculated the leaf photostimulated exportation consumption ratio. So that was was higher in the summer as compared to the winter. So that broke down the concept that it's the absolute values of photosynthesis in the leaf, or absolute values of carbohydrate in the leaf that controls photosynthesis. Actually, we show that it is the consumption, the demands, the strength that controls photosynthesis, right? So these are just examples that I brought here. As I said, I had to mix some subjects to speak to tell this title of speech that I was asked to do here. So these examples that I show, plus the example from Dr. Ziegler here. So these examples try to explain yields, and that's what we do, right? As plant physiologists, as plant molecular biologists, as plant scientists, we try to understand yields. We try to see how it responds. That's our job, right? That's what I meant here with this. But in the 90s, we had the solution, because we had been working on this since the discovery of DNA, the recombinant DNA, James Watson and Francis Crick. And in the 90s, we had the solution, right? So in the 90s, it appeared, for example, the Roundup Ready soybean, and the BT later on came, soybean, right? In the 90s, we also had some other things, but it was inappropriate. Okay, so, but we have to face a problem, right? It's some people, some governments, some people, some legislations don't like transgenic plants, but it is a solution, and now we have a problem. So let's see, there is a growing world population coming, increasing, and it's not going to stop, right? And while there is a growing population, it means that we have to produce more. We have to produce more food within the next 30, 50, or 100 years to feed those peoples, right? And the world is unlikely to stop growing. Although we can do some advertisements and we can think in different ways in the world, it's very different with different cultures, but it's not going to stop. This paper here is from Nature. It says that the African continent is going to have the same or about the same population of Asia population in 2100, right? So, so let's see what happened with the increasing of yields during the last century. So as you can see here, during the between 1920 and 1960, we had this rate of yielding increase. So for maize, we had 0.69, wheat and rice, just to depict the most important ones, right? But, and then we had a very steep increase in these rates. So between 1960 and 1990, so it almost doubled. Some other commodities also tripled or increased on a four-fold basis, right? And that was what? Was a result of the Green Revolution, thanks to Ramon Borlaug, right? But then, between the 90s and 2008, these rates of yield increasing, they were not so good anymore. They stabilized, as you can see here. So for maize, it didn't increase at all. For wheat and rice, it diminished, in fact, right? So this is very concerning, and we are the people, the scientists that have to solve that. That's our job, right? So, we have to think about that. Will we have to what to eat in the 50 years, within the next 30 years? So that was a paper I published with the previous president of the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology, Ricardo Pessan. Now he's the editor-in-chief of the Theoretical and Experimental Plant Physiology. This is an opinion, right? And it says something about the Global Plant Council. This is another paper talking about the same thing. It was written by Dr. Willie, which is now the acting president of the Global Plant Council. I don't know if you've seen this. There are some leaflets here, if somebody wants to take it. There's some more information about the Global Plant Council here. So the Global Plant Council was founded in 2009. As you can see here, there is some member from the Argentine Society of Plant Physiology, Dr. Morandi. It was during the American Society of Plant Biology meeting in Hawaii in 2009. And people there, they gathered and they thought that maybe we should do something, we should start something, because we have a problem and we are the guys that have to solve this, right? Because we work with yields, rates of yields, and plant scientists, that's what we do, right? So, however, we have the science, we have the technology. I've seen this week here and all over the other meetings that we go, we end up with transgenic plants. So that's why actually I put the first line of Dr. Ziegler that published in 1998, that he, in the conclusion, he would suggest, let's work this gene and put it in crops and help to have the rates, to increase the rates of cotton production and the wheat production, right? However, this paper here in 2010, it says that there's a problem with transgenic plants, and sometimes some legislations and some governments, especially Europe, well, this is a very debated issue, but it demonstrates, this paper here demonstrates that some legislations are now causing trade disruptions. So we have a solution, we have how to do it, but we have to do with this social, governmental, or political problem as well, right? So we got on a glacier, right? I don't know if you know, this is a shopping mall in Buenos Aires. It was from 2012. So this is a glacier, right, that we are living at. So this is the vice president of the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology. He was here in 2012. So, and then we went to Buenos Aires and did this beautiful shopping mall. So we are living under this glacier, right? And in last year, in the annual Global Plant Council meeting in Washington, they showed us this material, but you can go there and download it. It is a PDF, a very long PDF. That's a very interesting text. It brings some hints that we have to think about it. So, increase the ability to predict plant traits from plant genomes in diverse environments, link genome to performance. We've been doing that for years, right? Agronomically important plant traits. So, as I showed, sometimes photosynthesis cannot be related with yields, but stomatoconductant can do that, it does that, and other times dry matter accumulation, the old dry matter accumulation rate, right? So there is lots of hints, right? And you can go there and read it and think about it. Right? It's interesting to really think about the research outline, what we should do for the next 10 years, right? I depicted just one here that I'm going to give some examples, how plant species have adapted to stressful conditions. I don't know if you know, but this part of the wings of some aircrafts, I think Airbuses, this seems small, but it has up to 4 meters high, right? And it was based on the same position of this part of the wing of some eagles. This is not a novelty. This is called biomimetism, right? So why not doing that for plants too. Okay, it is difficult. We would cause catastrophic, if you take one gene here, would cause catastrophic problems with the other, with the whole plant. It's going to take a lot of time, but it's an idea. So I got this idea, and I wrote with my former PhD student this book chapter here, trying to see some possibilities with citrus, as Brazil is a great producer of citrus. And well, it was a book chapter. It was interesting. We did it, and that's okay. And we could show there that, for example, here we have congeneric species. This is from Brazilian savanna. This is, we don't have a scale here, but it is 1 meter long, and it grew for 90 days. The same congeneric species from an intermediate occurrence related to the environment. And this is from swamp forest. So congeneric species, something that gets this idea, right? So for my surprise, now I'm sorry this is in Portuguese, for my surprise, they, Agência FAPESP and Embrapa got this idea and released this news in June this year that some Brazilian plants can help face the impact of climatic change, right? And many other things that are there in that news. So this is feasible. We could use this idea of biomimetism to understand their genes, to understand their metabolism, and to try to, in the long run, put it in crops, right? So I'm telling this because, on the contrary to this idea, we are focused on crops and solely thinking about that. This is an example from rice. And while we are been using high-yielding varieties, this is in percentage, since 1960s and up to 1981, so we are increasing the use of high-yielding varieties in plant breeding programs. But on the other hand, we are diminishing the use of traditional varieties in the same plant breeding programs. So this is dichotomic, right? And we have to think about that. For example, coffee comes from Ethiopia, everybody knows that. Potatoes here from Peru, have citrus in Asia. We have to think and go after these genotypes and to rethink that subject, right? Professor Wheeler, for example, he conducts a very huge project with cassava in Africa. And I was baffled by knowing that there are people that in Europe or in America, they don't know cassava, right? So, and this is a source of starch that we could use, right? And at the same time, and this is in the material that I told you, in the ASPB website, we've been conducting a lot of genome sequencing since the 90s, right? But what have you been doing with this? Are being used for functional understanding of what's going on in the plants and the metabolism of plants? So some are not. So we have to think about that. That's another point that it's showed by this material here. And as a plant ecophysiologist, I always use this chart in my classes. And I think this summarizes what plant physiology is, because it's from this Russian guy, Nazarov, in 1978, in the Annual Review of Plant Physiology. It shows the environment there, and then the plant hormones, translating that signals to the plant. And then we have the construction of cells and biogenesis of chloroplasts, and that we're going to lead to the photosynthetic or to carbon balance. You have to discount photorespiration, dark respiration, blah, 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 everything we know it, right? And then it's going to relate with yields. That's what is very intuitive, right? But sometimes, as I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, yield does not correlate well with carbon balance, and we have to look at some different varieties, some different traits, like stomatal conductance, like rate of dry matter accumulation, and so on, right? So now, let's go back to the science that is being performed in South America. As you can see here, there's a lot of papers being produced in Brazil. And compared to Argentina and Chile, so we are producing a lot of papers, right? But we have to take care with these numbers. For example, we've been conducting a lot of connections between our pairs. So we make a lot of connections with Argentinian scientists, and Chilean scientists, and all of the other countries. But, and this is important to say that this is not plant science, this is science in general, right? So, but sometimes we are ugly in the picture here because in a great proportion, we do not make connections. And personally, this is my opinion, personally, agronomic science and plant science is very timid about that too, right? Although we know very good people and good groups of scientists that make those connections. I think this data is the same from Professor Edita that showed us on last Sunday night. So when you see the citation here, Brazil is very close to the average of South America, right? But we are below Argentina here, and we are below Peru. Citation gives some idea of quality of papers, right? Again, this is not plant science, this is not agronomic science, this is science in general, right? And we have to take out physics when you look at science in Brazil, because physics is a science area in Brazil that's very developed, right? And there's, in terms of quality, I mean. This is I put here, this is a recent paper from this girl here. She's in Austria, and she demonstrated a very, very interesting finding about light beams, right? That's very going to maybe change some technologies. Going back to those numbers, we can see here that when we compare with the 1,000 labor force in each country, of course, America is here with a great number, but we're better than Brazil, and we're going so-so. So this is another picture that we can think now. But let's see how much money we've been putting in research and development. So Brazil has been putting around 1.2 something of its GDP to research and development, right? And Argentina is below that, and then we have other countries here. And compared to how much money we put on research and development, there's something that's not going to be, we have to fix that, right? And if you go to just São Paulo, where I live, the São Paulo state, these slides are from the Professor Victor Cruz, the scientific director of the São Paulo Research Foundation. So São Paulo alone is here in relation to the GDP. So we are about 1.6% of the GDP is being expanded in research and development in São Paulo. If you take Brazil, it's a little bit worse than that, right? And there is a line here that's 2% of the GDP, and above that are France and European Union, Germany, America, Japan, South Korea, Sweden. But South Korea were in our condition in the 60s. That's what calls the attention, right? We have to remember that. There is a perspective here between 1998 and 2009. And we can see that we have been improving that numbers when you analyze, for example, articles per scientist. So there is a political issues in Brazil that putting pressure on us. I think everywhere, all over the world. But we've been improving, and that's why it shows a graph like this, right? That one that I showed you. Oops. Result in this, I think, right? So, and these are the data that the Professor Edita showed us last Sunday night. So when you compare the total number of articles in the field, we are better than you. But when you put the impact relative of these papers, again, this is not plant science, this is not agronomic science, this is total papers in all these science fields, right? We are together. So this is an auto-criticism. Maybe Brazilians that are in this audience don't like to see this number. But we have to be critics with ourselves, because from critics, it results in quality, right? That's it all over the world. And if you get the impact of, now that it is the different science areas, and then you have here, this is for São Paulo, right? Plant and animal science, agricultural science, and biology and biochemistry is where plant science in general maybe is located, right? So we are below the 1 line, 1.0 line. And as I told you, that's why I gave the example of physics. Physics is very above that point, right? So they've been doing a great job in Brazil. Well, this is since the 50s, right? And there's more numbers from this publication here, that when we compare, for example, the patents granted. So, and then we have Chile right ahead of us, then Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, right? So these are numbers that we have to think about. It. I have been discussing with my peers in my institution, and some lectures that I had the opportunity to show. And then at the end of the Congress, we have to check the hypothesis Professor Edita told us to do on last Sunday night, right? So hypothesis one is that plant science or plant physiology is innovative, right? Or isn't it, or is not innovative? What do you think? So you have the answers. Nobody has that answers, except this guy here, right? Because he said that. That's Tuesday. So it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the situation, right? So we have to think about that. But we cannot forget that there is a fact that we have to face, and we are the guys that are responsible, are going to be responsible in the future for food production, right? The world relies on, the world relies on 10 major crops to provide us with 95% of our food. This slide here is from the Global Plant Council. And currently, 1 billion people in the world are hungry. Okay, there is a lot of food waste being conducted everywhere. We can see that. And there is dietary problems as well. My father and my mother are physicians, and they say it, right? People have problems to eat, education problem, okay? But let's put that out of the question here. Currently, 1 billion people in the world are hungry. And it takes 1 ton of water to produce 1 kilogram of wheat, in general, right? That calls our attention. I have this flyer here stuck on my door, outside of my door in my department, and once one undergraduate student knocked on my door and said, "Hey, professor, I have a question." Yes, it's really true, this phrase here, it takes 1 ton of water to produce 1 kilogram of wheat. And then I answered him, 2 things. Yes, it is real. Number 2, you've not been attending my plant physiology classes. So plant physiology is the science of plants altogether. So plant molecular biology, plant biochemistry, so, and plant physiology, classical, non-classical. We're all together, and we have to face this challenge. And in the future, we are going to be blamed for not having done our task now, or we are going to be praised for having done a very good job, right? So we have a responsibility. I would like to finish and to say that next year we're going to have the 15th Congress of the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology. It's going to be in Foz do Iguaçu. This date here, we are still thinking because of now we have the IPMB, that it would be nice to put them together. Some people have already come to me during this meeting and asked about that. But, well, we're going to have the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology meeting there in Foz do Iguaçu 2015. And also the annual meeting of the Global Plant Council maybe is going to be held there, right? So I would like to say, finally, that for me it's very important to have this agreement with the Argentine Society of Plant Physiology, with these great scientists and great works I've been seeing during this week here in this Congress. And we have to put efforts and work together with our different expertise to produce good science and have a better world in the future. So thank you very much.
Obrigado, Gustavo. For your excellent talk. Hay preguntas o comentarios, pueden ser en cualquier idioma, traducimos, ¿sí? Así que, Edith.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's been very nice to hear you. And I think that it's good that we reflect on this hypothesis on our daily work as we go back home and not just here at the meeting. I think we have plenty of reasons to think that we can prove this wrong. I think there have been several talks in this meeting, and I'm very optimistic, actually. And I think that the future, I think that actually whether we will be held responsible for not doing what we do, it depends entirely on us. And so, but I'm optimistic.
Me too.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
I enjoyed a lot your talk. I have a very provocative question. Okay?
So I will not have the answer, right?
Oh, I'm just giving a knife to put in your throat. Anyway, every time I start my classes in plant physiology, I like to define plant physiology. Okay? And I usually say that plant physiology is the response of the mechanism or the metabolism of plants in relation to the interactions with the environment and biotic and abiotic influence. Okay, so it means pest, disease, and water, and whatever you can think about. Okay? So plant change according to the environment in the whole. And we have been seeing a very huge development of technology. Okay? For example, in 2000, we had sequenced the Zilella in Brazil, and that took 2 years to complete. and we can now sequence one bacteria in 1 week. Okay, and the cost is went down a lot, so you can usually pay $1,000, $1,500 for one. Okay, and as I showed, we have now sequencing lots of information. Okay, and this is one point. Another point that we more and more we see research going very deep in the cell. Okay, and sometimes this is difficult to find some relationship with what I said about plant physiology, the definition of plant physiology. Yeah? And you showed that we have lots of people to feed. Okay, and you showed that in the end of the story is yield. Okay, it's producing food. And in my talk today, I said that I didn't have answers for the molecular or for the lignin stuff in the sugar cane because I was measuring expression, but I added acid. Okay, but are you sure that about the genes, about the F5H, okay, gene? So it seems to me that we are increasing the knowledge, and perhaps we are not using all this knowledge, okay? Or we are just spreading technology a lot, and we are not focusing this task, as I said, to make more food. And I believe that most of this, to reach this fact, is who is doing this is the breeders. Okay, we are missing breeders. They are not being formed no longer because we have only molecular biology, traditional breeders. It's a hair person, scientist. Okay? I'd like to hear about this.
Well, I share the same impression that you have. I share the same impression that you have, Paul. As a classical ecophysiologist, I feel this. But I try reading lots of papers in different areas. So I have a PhD student working on plant molecular biology. I have students working with photosynthesis, and I have students work with biomass, with dry matter accumulation. So I have a very broad view of the growing of plants, of the plant physiology. But as you said, and as I said too, I share these concerns that you have. I think, because Luis asked me when he sent me the email to make a review of the Congress in my last talk, right? And I've seen here in the posters, in the lectures, that we need to perform more integrative plant physiology. We have to put together working the ecophysiologist with the plant molecular biologist and put chemicists together and some economicists together, right? Some scienceometric scientists together, and we have to do more integrative science, I think. And you know, if you do that, I think we can solve two problems. And I was forgetting the plant breeders too, because I agree with you. There is a distance between plant physiologists, plant molecular biologists, plant cell scientists, and the breeders and the plant breeder scientists. And we could solve two problems: the quality of papers, and also maybe the food production or the perspective for food production. That's what I think.
I completely agree, and you know, I think the same gap exists wherever I go in the world, the same problem you described. But I see more and more people coming together, scientists coming together to try and answer this. So I would only encourage you to work with people outside your field, to really step outside what you do daily. And even if that means, you know, if you normally work in the field, try to work with a molecular biologist or vice versa. But equally, as I said in my talk at the start, to go and speak to mathematicians, physicists, engineers. We really need to think about this, and all together we can think about answering the problems. And when it comes to the plant breeders, I would just say that we have the same problem in the UK, and we took the same similar data that Gustavo showed, but for the UK, there's a dip in our education of plant scientists. And I'm glad to say that after 5 years of trying, they've put money into this area now. So I would equally encourage you to lobby your governments as well.
Well, if you allow me some comments on that. It was also impressive to me that I saw Willie, that he co-authored the famous book, Plant Biochemistry, with Professor Buchanan and Russell Jones, that you and I and you know. So he's a molecular biologist. Willie, I'm talking about Willie. He's a molecular biologist, a plant biochemist, and he's conducting some experiments, very simple ones, in Africa with cassava. So just to conduct this thing that we have to look at things that we have forgotten in the last few years, right? Like varieties, like different genotypes spread all over the world.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? I have a question. Which are the main topics you think, after reviewing, after looking at the poster, the symposium, the conference, the main topics that are the main interesting topic to collaborate between Brazilian physiologists and Argentinian physiologists or Latinoamerican physiologists, and perhaps more specifically between the Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology and the Argentinian Society of Plant Physiology.
It's a difficult question.
Yes, I know.
Well, I've seen many posters, and I think you have the right numbers to tell, but I think there's a lot of papers on photosynthesis and physiology. Well, I can't tell the right proportion, but one impression I had was that you were performing here the so-called crop physiology in a different way we do in Brazil. It was an impression I had. I think you work more like together. You put different views, standpoints to solve, for example, an aspect that I'm very interested in. But I went to some symposium here in rice production, for example, and in energy conversion, biomass energy, solar energy into biomass. And I think you have an expertise in, I'm not sure if I should say that, but you have an expertise for sure in this crop physiology that we have, I think, this is personal, my impression. We have a long run to do in this. Maybe we could, you Argentinians could collaborate with us. I'm not telling that we don't have experts in Brazil on this field. We have good people there, we have good scientists there. But, what can I say, the whole number of scientists in Brazil, and as you've seen in this picture from nature, we're producing a lot of papers. And when you produce paper, you put a lot of effort, energy, time, English, money, everything. And then they're not being cited. And the question I asked to Professor Edita on last Sunday night, and I forgot to say something about our journal, is that, that the most productive areas or responsible for agricultural production in the world are in Argentina, well, in South America, and we have some in Asia and in America. And I asked her last Sunday night why the best journals in plant science and plant biochemistry and agronomic science are not in the regions where agricultural production is being performed seriously, or not seriously, but in a great with numbers, huge numbers. We have here. Take citrus in Brazil, for example. Take soybean here in Argentina and Brazil. Take wheat here in Argentina, right? So why is that? And the answer she gave me was, well, that's complicated because the best journals are in Europe, in America, in Asia. And I think we have to make a brainstorm, rethink that, and put the experts together and take advantage of that. Take advantage of that. So, just going back to my answering again my question, your question. I think you have an expertise in crop physiology, and we should collaborate. I think Paul wants to say something.
I have a suggestion. At least in Brazil, I don't know about in Argentina, but in Brazil, a lot of publications are in Portuguese, okay? And probably you don't have access for these publications, and because it's crop physiology, it has an interest in Brazilian agronomy, okay, agriculture. And perhaps Brazilian Society of Plant Physiology is not so big, and the Argentinian Society, I don't think that's big as well. So I think that the first thing would be a kind of presentation. It's a kind of a profile of each researcher, okay, with the kind of research that has been conducted by that researcher, and put this in one side, Brazilian Society or the Argentinian Society, and so the guys become presented and start a new collaboration. Because by sure, we have lots and lots of publications, good publications in Portuguese that we don't look at them. We just read in English and high impact journals, and we are looking for this because we are pressed to publish in these papers. But if we are interested to produce food, so maybe we should start with this. I don't know, it's a suggestion. Of course, that's more work for you.
Thank you. ¿Hay alguna pregunta más? ¿Alguien quiere hacer algún comentario? Any comments? Bueno, agradecemos entonces a Gustavo por su excelente